Okay, let's unpack this. It's a question, that pops into mind for pretty much anyone thinking about burning a few extra calories.
Mhm.
If you're covering the same distance, say a mile, is walking or running better?
Yeah, it seems simple on the surface, right? Go faster, burn more, but like you said, better. It gets a bit tricky. Does intensity only count during the exercise?
Huh?
Or is there, an effect after you stop, too?
Exactly. And that's precisely why we're doing this deep dive today. We're looking at a specific study from the Journal of Strength and Conditioning Research.
Mm-hmm.
They really zeroed in on this exact question, but with people like most of us, average folks.
Right. Their goal was pretty clear. Directly compare the energy expenditure, basically, the kilojoules or calories burned, and crucially, after a 1,600-meter walk versus a 1,600-meter run.
Which is about a mile, for reference.
Yeah, roughly a mile.
Yeah.
And they specifically recruited individuals with average fitness levels.
And that context is really key, isn't it? The paper itself highlights how vital physical activity is for, general health and managing weight.
Definitely. They even cited some older CDC data from 2009, I think, showing that only about half the adults in the U.S. were meeting the physical activity guidelines back then.
Wow, only half.
Yeah. And we know obesity is a growing concern with huge health risks and pretty significant economic costs, too, like $117 billion back in 2000, according to the Surgeon General then.
So finding ways to move that are easy to access is super important.
Exactly. And walking and running, they're perfect examples. You don't need fancy gear. No expensive gym membership required for most people.
So the study aimed to give us some solid data on how these two really common activities stack up. Not just the burn while you're moving, but also that bit afterwards.
Right. They felt this was kind of a gap. A lot of earlier studies used, like elite athletes maybe,
Oh.
or they didn't always measure that post-exercise energy burn, what we often call EPOC. Yeah, excess post-exercise oxygen consumption. It's that sort of afterburn effect.
Got it. Okay, so let's get into the study details. How did they set it up? What were the paces?
Okay, so participants walked 1,600 meters at 86 meters per minute. That translates to roughly 3.2 miles per hour. A good brisk walk.
Okay, definitely moving.
And then they ran the same distance, 1,600 meters, at 160 meters per minute. That's closer to 6 miles per hour. So a decent jogging or running pace for many.
And these paces were picked because they're generally doable for young adults with that average fitness level they were targeting.
Exactly. And the participants were just that. 30 young adults, 15 females, 15 males, all screened and categorized as having average fitness based on standard ACSM guidelines.
Right. And how do they actually measure the energy burn?
They used what's called a metabolic cart. It sounds complicated, but basically it measures the oxygen you breathe in and the carbon dioxide you breathe out.
Okay.
And that gives a really accurate calculation of how much energy your body is using at any given moment.
So they measured this when?
They got a baseline reading at rest for 10 minutes before any exercise. Then they measured continuously during the walk or the run.
Makes sense.
And then this is the important bit for EPOD. They kept measuring for a full 30 minutes after the person finished exercising.
Okay, 30 minutes post-exercise. And they did the walk and run on different days.
Yep, separate days. And they had familiarization sessions beforehand, too, just to make sure everyone was comfortable with the treadmill and the mask and everything. Prevent fatigue affecting the results.
Good setup. All right, let's get to the juicy part, the findings. What did they discover about the energy burn during the exercise itself?
Well, no big surprise here, really. The running definitely burned more energy while they were covering that 1,600 meters.
Right.
On average, the run clocked in at about 471 kilojoules burned during the activity. The walk, at its pace, averaged around 372 kilojoules for the same distance.
So over that same mile, running burned, what's that? Almost 100 kilojoules more, just during the exercise part.
Roughly, yeah.
Yeah.
About 98.5 kilojoule difference on average during the bout itself. That's pretty significant, just for the activity time.
Okay, so running wins during the mile. What about that afterburn, the EPOC you mentioned? Did that differ?
Yes, they looked really closely at that. And remember, EPOC is your metabolism staying elevated after you stop burning extra calories compared to just sitting still.
Right.
They found that, yes, post-exercise energy expenditure did stay elevated above resting levels for a while after both activities. It wasn't just the run.
Oh, interesting. So even the walk had some afterburn. How long did it last for each?
For the walkers, their energy burn seemed to return pretty close to their normal resting baseline, around 10 minutes after they finished. For the runners, it stayed elevated a bit longer, returning to baseline around the 15-minute mark post-exercise.
So 5 minutes longer for the run's afterburn effect, roughly.
Yeah.
Was the level of that afterburn different too? Like how high did the metabolism spike?
It was. They looked at specific time points. For example, at 5 minutes after stopping, the walkers were still burning energy about 60% higher than their normal resting rate.
60%, okay. Still noticeable.
Definitely. But the runners at that same 5-minute mark were burning energy at a rate about 79% above their resting levels.
So a big initial spike after the run. Both activities gave a boost, but the runs was sort of more intense right after finishing.
Exactly. A higher magnitude of EPHOS, at least initially.
Okay, let's put it all together then. Running burns more during. It has a slightly longer and maybe more intense afterburn right after. What about the total energy expenditure? When you add up the exercise burn plus that extra post-exercise burn over the whole measurement period.
Yeah, when they summed it all up, the energy burned during the mile plus the extra energy burned in that 30-minute recovery window, the difference became even clearer.
How much clearer?
The total for the 1,600-meter walk, including the afterburn measured, averaged about 463 kilojoules.
Okay.
The total for the 1,600-meter run, that averaged 664 kilojoules.
Wow. Okay, that is a big difference. Over 200 kilojoules more for the run total for that 1 mile.
Yep. And just to break down that afterburn part, the additional kilojoules burned just in that post-exercise period were around 91 kilojoules for the walk and about 193 kilojoules for the run. So the afterburn contribution itself was more than double for the run compared to the walk for that same distance covered.
That's fascinating. The afterburn really adds up, especially after the more intense activity. Did they see differences between the male and female participants?
They did look at that. And as you often see, males generally expended more kilojoules overall. That's pretty typical, often related to differences in body mass and composition.
Right.
But, and this is the important point they made when they statistically accounted for body mass, that significant difference between walking and running still held true for both males and females.
Okay. So it wasn't just about size. The finding that running burns more kilojoules than walking per distance at these paces applies across the board, regardless of sex, once you factor in body mass.
Exactly. It seems inherent to the activity intensity itself.
All right, so the data's pretty clear. Running at that 6-mile-per-hour pace burns more kilojoules per mile than walking at that brisk 3.2-mile-per-hour pace, both during the activity and when you add in the afterburn. So what does this actually mean for you, the listener, trying to decide, walk or run today?
Well, it means if your only goal is to maximize the calorie burn over a specific distance, like 1 mile, and you're comfortable running at that kind of moderate pace,
6-mile-per-hour pace.
then yes, running is the more efficient choice,
Yeah.
calorie-wise, for that specific distance. The study showed it burned about 98 kilojoules more during and over 200 kilojoules more in total for that 1,600 meters.
And this feels like a big but is coming. The study didn't just say run, don't walk, did it?
No, absolutely not. And this is crucial. They explicitly concluded that walking is still a viable option for burning additional calories above baseline values.
Viable option.
Yes, and they called it an acceptable activity for increasing your energy expenditure. So how do you balance that? Running burns more per mile, but walking is still really good.
Yeah, how do you make sense of that for planning your week?
I think that's where you look at the bigger picture, like official health recommendations, the American College of Sports Medicine ACSM guidelines.
Right, they have weekly targets.
They do. For weight management, a common target is expending at least 4,184 kilojoules. That's about 1,000 calories per week through physical activity.
Okay.
And you can achieve that with, say, 150 minutes of moderate intensity activity per week or 75 minutes of vigorous intensity activity per week.
So how do the studies walk and run fit into those recommendations? Let's use their numbers.
Okay, if you walked at the study's pace, that brisk walk, which counts as moderate intensity for the recommended 150 minutes a week.
That's 30 minutes, 5 days a week.
Right. You'd expend roughly 300 and 475 kilojoules based on the study's average burn rate per mile.
So 300, 495 kiloj. That's actually a bit short of the 484 kiloj target, isn't it?
It is a little bit short based on just that 150 minutes at that specific pace.
Okay, what about the run? Running at the study's pace, vigorous intensity for the recommended 75 minutes a week.
If you did that, running at 6 miles per hour for 75 minutes total in the week, you'd expend approximately 4,980 kilojoules.
So that exceeds the 4,184 kiloj target pretty comfortably.
Exactly. Running for half the time gets you over the target, according to these numbers.
But hang on, let's look back at the walking number. 300 and 475 kiloj from 150 minutes. You're not that far off the 4984 target.
No, you're really not. You could easily bridge that gap by just walking a little bit longer each session, couldn't you?
Yeah, instead of 30 minutes, maybe walk for, what, 35 or 40 minutes most days?
Precisely. Walking for, say, 35, 40 minutes 5 times a week at that pace would likely get you right around or even over that 4,184 kiloj target.
So walking is definitely still a powerful tool for meeting those weekly goals.
Absolutely. And the study really stressed that practical benefit we mentioned earlier. Both walking and running are just so common, so accessible.
Right. No gym needed.
No gym needed, no special equipment really. So, fitness professionals can feel totally confident recommending either activity. It depends on the person, their preferences, their current fitness, their goals, how much time they have.
Okay, so summing up the practical takeaway here. Both walking at a brisk pace and running at a moderate pace for the same distance significantly boost your energy burn compared to sitting around. That seems clear.
Definitely. Both also give you that beneficial afterburn effect, that EPOC, keeping your metabolism elevated for a bit, even after you stop moving.
Even if the run's afterburn was maybe a bit bigger and lasted a little longer right afterwards in the study.
Right. And yes, while running at the higher intensity does burn more calories per mile covered.
The key qualifier there.
Per mile, yes. Walking briskly is still a highly effective, super accessible, and, as the study said, perfectly acceptable way to increase your overall energy expenditure. It can absolutely make a substantial contribution to meeting those weekly activity goals for health and weight management.
This study gives us really useful, specific numbers to think about. And it does leave us with an interesting thought, doesn't it? For you, the listener, planning your own activity. Given that higher intensity seems connected to a bigger, maybe longer-lasting afterburn, and knowing both walking and running add up towards those weekly calorie targets, how might you choose? Do you walk faster? Walk longer. Run shorter distances. Maybe run for longer.
Yeah, how do you balance the burn during the activity with that potential extra burn afterwards?
Exactly. And how does that fit with your current fitness level and maybe just as importantly, the actual time you have available each day or week?
It's not just about the numbers per mile, but how it fits into your life.
Definitely something to mull over as you think about your next steps, or maybe your next strides.